Welcome back, Gravers, to Barnabas's Boneyard. I, of course, am your host, Barnabas, and welcome back to yet another episode of the Boneyard. As you can tell if you saw the last video about Subspecies 5, I'm still in the same attire. I promised you I was going to film them back to back, but I just decided to throw on the hat, put the Stephen King blanket down, switch it up just a little bit. So as promised, again, this episode is going to be all about a brand new horror release. Just like Subspecies 5, which just came out, this movie also just came out. As far as I'm aware, it is not streaming anywhere, but it is on VOD, so available to rent or buy, I believe on Amazon Prime, Vudu, and maybe some other sources as well. Depends on your region, of course. At least here in the US, that's where it is available. And it is a Shudder film, so I imagine it is going to be coming to Shudder at some point, hopefully pretty soon. But I have no information about that yet. The movie in question is The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster. So my wife first heard this, she said, like, wow, that's really quite the controversial title. And I'm like, yeah, well, it is fitting, though. It makes a lot of sense. When you see the movie, you'll understand why. But I'm going to be discussing the film today as spoiler-free as possible, just because I don't want any of you watching to, have the movie ruined by my analysis of it. That's what the podcast episodes are for, of Grave Discussions. We do go into spoiler territory there, but I'm going to try not to get into spoiler territory here. I just want to cover the movie as objectively and slightly subjectively as possible, give you my analysis, my review, and just let you know if it's worth your time, honestly, if you should see it. I think every movie is worth watching, but I understand a lot of people value their time and don't want to watch it. Don't want to watch something that they think is just going to be a waste, but that's a whole other discussion, I feel like. Anyway, I try to give every movie a fair shot, and without getting too much into it just yet, I think this movie is actually worth it. So let's just dive right into it. Before that, though, I just want to give a quick plug to defactofilmreviews.com. I actually covered this movie in a written review on that site. I've been writing for them for a little while now. That was the latest film that I covered on De Facto. So go check out the written review after you watch this video. I also try to avoid spoilers on there, but I give a detailed analysis on that site. So if I happen to miss anything in this video, which there's a good chance I might, there's a good chance that I cover on the written article. Okay, so go check it out. I'll link that down below. And let's just dive right into it. So The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster is actually another Frankenstein adaptation. I know what you're thinking. Oh, God, Barnabas, another Frankenstein adaptation. Well, yeah, but the thing with this movie is that it is actually pretty unique. If you're one of those people who are like, why are they throwing this woke thing into my horror movies, especially my Frankenstein? I don't know. I don't know what to tell you at that point. I honestly, if that's your line of thinking, I'm just going to be honest. I think you might be kind of like a lost cause. I hope you change your mind, because this is actually a pretty refreshing take on the Frankenstein mythos. But that's just my interpretation of it. The movie follows a young black girl who is actually quite brilliant. She does live in kind of an impoverished neighborhood with essentially drug runners and gangsters, presiding over the neighborhood, kind of, taking charge, taking control, and sort of, exerting their influence on the inhabitants. And it's very noticeable, like a lot of people in the neighborhood are affected by these people, and especially her. The girl portrayed by Lea de Leon Hayes. Her name is Vicaria. F. You can probably guess what the F stands for. I don't think it's ever said in the movie, but it's implied. So probably Frankenstein, or what have you. But her brother was actually, it's revealed like right at the beginning of the movie, so it's not really a spoiler, but her brother, I think, was part of their gang, and during some operation, I don't know, he was gunned down and killed. So obviously, Vicaria has a very personal and emotional vendetta against these gangsters who are led by Denzel Whitaker playing Kango. And even her father is affected. He, in order to cope with everything, he's like overworked, of course, because Vicaria's mother died as well. I'm not exactly sure if it was implied that her mother died also because of the gangsters, but I think you can probably guess that. But anyway, Donald, now being a single father, overworked, he takes to these drugs being pushed by Kango and his boys, and that obviously affects his relationship with his daughter because he's not always able to be there, even like mentally, for her. But he's trying to get better. But yeah, man, like, her whole life is essentially affected by these gangsters, by the drugs, by death in particular, because she's lost 2 members of her family already, and she sees it all around her every day, which is kind of like a striking but very realistic look into what is happening in real life all around us, in these ghettos, in the hood, in places where there is a heavy Black population, many of who do turn to crime because that seems like the only way out. I mean, it's very real. It happens. I live in Michigan, but I live down in the Metro Detroit area, very close to Detroit. And if you live up in the suburbs, you don't really see it too much. I mean, there's crime, but it's not exactly the same. I mean, there are neighborhoods, communities, areas down in those kind of environments where this type of thing is a daily occurrence. So this is a film with a predominantly Black cast, written and directed by Bomani J. Story, who is a Black man, and his feature film debut, by the way, too. So very impressive, and I congratulate you for that, Mr. Story. But so they clearly wanted to shed a light on the fact that this sort of thing does happen in real life, and that people, even young people, are affected by this. But obviously this story takes that and then twists it a little bit by having Vicaria as this kind of young genius who really has it out for death. She seeks to conquer the thing that conquered her family, and she views death as more of a disease, actually, rather than just like a symptom of life. And she thinks that she's able to find the right combination of things to fix death. And so we actually see right at the very beginning of the movie, Vicaria drags her dead brother's body away. And what do you think happens? She, of course, uses her brains, her scientific means, in a dingy little like abandoned building near where she lives, to essentially bring her brother back to life. But of course, if you know anything about the Frankenstein mythos, he doesn't quite come back as himself. He comes back as a monster, the titular monster, of the film. And so already, I mean, you can see the stark, contrasts between like this movie and, the 1930s Frankenstein, right? With Boris Karloff, of course, iconic as Frankenstein's monster. But that movie, of course, happened, over 80, 90 years ago now. So, I mean, culturally, much, much different, right? And if I'm not mistaken, that movie took place like in Europe. I could be wrong about that. I don't know. I forget a lot about the original film. Yeah. So, but anyway, predominantly white cast there. Just kind of a different approach to the narrative. You have this scientist who constructs a creature from the pieces of different human beings. In this one, it's a much more personal connection between creator and creature, right? You have a brother and a sister who wants to conquer death so that she can be with her family, so that she doesn't have to suffer the losses of anybody that she loves anymore, which I think adds a really dynamic element to Frankenstein lore, right? I mean, we haven't seen anything like that quite so much with a lot of these other Frankenstein adaptations, and especially not something with a majority black cast and encompassing predominantly black themes either. And I think Story does a great job of addressing those things throughout it. I mean, he addresses like the chronic drug use. He addresses the gang culture. He kind of addresses. I wish he addressed this aspect of it a little bit more, but he addresses how a gifted young black person can kind of fall by the wayside because of all these things, growing up in this sort of environment, but still being able to excel in ways too, right? I mean, she's very tough, she's resilient, she does use her brains. Although one criticism I think I would have of the movie is that at times it feels like, especially once the kind of midpoint happens and going into like, even throughout some of the rising action and like the climax, and then the last third of the film, really the finale of the film, it kind of feels like that characteristic of Vicaria's is sort of pushed aside a little bit. I wish we got to see a little bit more throughout that last big portion of the film of her just being a young, talented, gifted, black girl. But instead, like, I don't know, it's kind of weird. Like, once you really get into the horror of it all, and Chris is kind of Chris is her brother, who is the monster. Once he's kind of unleashed, because he sort of become, much like Karloff's Frankenstein's monster, becomes sort of unleashed, escapes his creator and attempts to, I guess, find himself, do his own thing. Although in this movie, I think is far less complex than Karloff's Frankenstein's monster, and far less kind of sympathetic, because this movie really does kind of portray him as just a lumbering creature. And the movie almost becomes like a slasher later on, which for some people might be preferable. Some people might not want a movie that strictly addresses, the challenges of black culture and, an impoverished community and all these kind of difficult themes, right? Surrounding, death and family and all these other things. Some people might just want to see that, like, low to the ground, gritty, gory slasher. And it definitely feels like that's what this movie becomes. I mean, Chris as the monster sort of has those elements to him, right? You see like the stalking, you see him using even like weaponry and using his new kind of monstrous state to intimidate and just mercilessly kill people in a very gory way, and just mercilessly kill people in a very gory way. So I don't know, I found that aspect of it a little off-putting, just because the first like significant part of the film kind of makes it feel like this is going to be something a little different, so that kind of tonal shift is a little jarring. I mean, I thought they still did it pretty well. The gore effects almost remind me of like 70s exploitation horror films, like those kind of effects. I don't know. It just resembles that to me. I don't know. I'm curious to see if anybody else feels the same way. But I think the actual gore effects are quite good. And visually, I mean, from a technical aspect, the movie is stunning, especially for a first film. Like the movie is stunning. Uh, I don't know if they shot on film or used a filter, but the film has that grainy kind of film quality to it that I really like. And the interesting thing is that the use of color in this film adds so much in conjunction with that kind of film filter. The colors really pop. The characters' wardrobes and makeup and hair and everything pop as well. So from a purely visual standpoint, I think it's pretty fantastic. And there are lots of kind of sequences in the movie that are a little bit more stylized as well, that really kind of fit in with the tone of the film as well. And those are some of my favorite parts of the movie, from like a visual technical standpoint. Audio wise, also, don't really have too much to complain about. I was a little bit disappointed with how like the creature sort of sounded, and like his dialogue and everything like that. Again, just made it seem far less complex than like Karloff's monster. That's probably what they were going for, I guess. But I wish there was a little bit more to that character than just becoming like this lumbering kind of brutish slasher almost. But I get it. He died a violent death, and so mentally don't think it's all there. But that would be kind of like, I think later on in the film, the characters unfortunately get kind of lost within all the violence and everything like that. And I would have liked to see them be explored a little bit more, even at the end with what happens. I'm not going to spoil it, but it just kind of feels like it's one of those things where it feels like there aren't too many lessons learned, and more specifically, like the characters are not able to fully develop kind of a logical kind of arc to them, right? Like they almost feel like they stay sort of one dimensional, and yeah, I that would be my biggest gripe with the movie. But in terms of the horror, I thought it was pretty good. We see some shots of the character kind of lurking and in the shadows and everything like that. And from a story standpoint, it's decent. I mean, I will say some plot threads do develop pretty nicely and come to a conclusion, but I do have some slight issues with the ending and with the characters primarily. But overall, I mean, for a feature film debut, focusing on the themes, it's focusing on the characters, it's focusing on, and the fact that this is honestly a pretty refreshing take on Frankenstein, and it does it in a way that it doesn't just feel like, oh, it's a Frankenstein adaptation. Like, if that wasn't immediately clear, it could stand on its own. I think this movie definitely stands on its own as a film that's not just a Frankenstein adaptation, right? And that's pretty rare, honestly, for a movie to do when it is so obviously influenced by something preceding it, So there's definitely, a breath of fresh air to this one. Definitely some originality to it. And like I said, an impressive debut from Bomani J. Story. And I'm excited to see what else he does, in the future. So also forgot to mention acting wise, honestly, all pretty good acting. I wasn't super thrilled by Denzel Whitaker as Kango, I will say. Not that he did a bad job acting or anything, but I don't know, just as the gang leader, sort of, right? He's supposed to be this like intimidating, charismatic kind of guy. I wasn't completely sold on that, but Leah Hayes as Vicaria, and especially Chad Coleman as her father Donald, I think did a great job. And then young Amani Summer as Jada, who I could be mistaken, I think is maybe Vicaria's niece, also did a great job. I think she has a bright future ahead of her. She was both cute and like creepy in this movie in her role. which the latter may have been unintentional. I don't know, but she, in a lot of ways, she was creepy. Of course, she's like kind of the little girl who, in a very tropey way, becomes, sort of friends with the becomes friends with the Frankenstein's monster. So, but anyway, as I already said, I mean, I think Story has a bright future ahead of him as well as a film director, and this is a pretty successful first debut, I believe. So, I gave The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster a 3.5 out of 5. I do think it's worth checking out, especially if you want to see sort of, a more unique take on Frankenstein, and especially if you want to see more stories about Black Americans and their challenges and their struggles, and just I would say a pretty good approach to that in horror. So yeah, that's going to be the end of the video. Like I said before at the beginning, I did write a review for this movie on De Facto Film Reviews. That's going to be linked down in the description, as well as all of the other links to Grave Discussions, our latest episode about Evil Dead Rise. If you haven't seen that yet, go check it out. I know it's a hot topic right now on social media and everything with the Max release. So go listen to that episode if you haven't already. And please be sure to give us a follow and a like everywhere. Subscribe to the Grave Discussions YouTube channel if you have not done so yet. We've got plenty more episodes of Barnabas's Boneyard and hopefully some other goodies coming out pretty soon. But that's going to do it. Until next time, fiends, I'm your host, Barnabas, and we'll see you back here at the Boneyard.